Have you ever wondered where your tears go? Where do all the tears shed by humanity end up? In Ürgüp, in Turkey's Cappadocia region, an old local saying warns, "Don't cry near the underground river, for its waters are made of the tears of those who've wept too much." An archaeologist learned this the hard way. Now she can't stop crying, and she's sinking deeper and deeper. Mina Kazan, a 34-year-old Turkish-American archaeologist, was returning to her grandparents' homeland for the first time. After losing her husband in a car accident 6 months earlier, she joined an excavation in Ürgüp's underground caves, hoping the work would help her move past the grief that seemed endless. Cappadocia's rock formations always had an otherworldly feel. Jagged fairy chimneys piercing the sky, caves carved into stone by ancient civilizations, lunar landscapes that didn't seem to belong to this world. But there was something more in the newly discovered tunnels her team was exploring. Something that made the air feel denser, heavier, with every meter they descended. "These markings are unlike anything we've documented in the region," murmured Professor Öztürk, her mentor and expedition leader, as he studied symbols carved into the walls of a narrow corridor. "They seem to represent tears, and look how all these channels lead downward." A chill ran down Mina's spine as her flashlight illuminated one of the symbols. A human face twisted in agony, with deep grooves running from its eyes to a grotesquely elongated mouth. What disturbed her most was how much that face resembled her late husband's the last time she'd seen him. That night, alone in her tent near the cave entrance, Mina dreamed of her husband. In the dream, he stood with his back to her, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she reached out to touch him, he turned, but his face was just an empty mask with 2 black holes where tears poured out, not as liquid, but as small, translucent, writhing creatures like larvae. She woke, choking back a scream, her face wet. She'd been crying in her sleep again, but as she wiped her tears with the back of her hand, she noticed something strange. They felt thicker than they should, and they glowed faintly in the dark with a bluish luminescence. "It's just stress," she muttered to herself. But as she stood to get water, she saw that the drops that had fallen on the tent floor were slowly moving toward the cave entrance, as if drawn by an invisible force. The next day, the team ventured deeper into the tunnels. The cave system seemed endless, with chambers opening into even larger halls. The air grew increasingly humid, and a constant dripping sound followed them. But there was no visible water anywhere, just trails of moisture on the walls, like the tracks of giant tears. "Doe." "You hear that?" Mina asked, stopping abruptly. "It sounds like someone crying." The others paused and listened. Professor Öztürk frowned. "It's probably just wind passing through a crevice in the rock." But it wasn't wind, Mina was sure. It was a low, steady sobbing like a lost child, and it seemed to come from all directions at once. As they pressed on, Mina noticed her tears wouldn't stop flowing. At first, she thought it was just dust irritating her eyes, but soon she realized she was crying uncontrollably, unable to stop. Strangest of all, no one else seemed to notice. "Mina, come see this," Öztürk called, his voice echoing from an adjacent chamber. "I think we've found what we were looking for." The chamber was perfectly circular, with a vaulted ceiling, so high their flashlights barely reached it. In the center was a pit about 10 feet wide. Its depth was impossible to gauge, but from it came the sound of rushing water mixed with those distant wails. "The underground river," the professor whispered, his voice full of awe. "Mentioned in ancient Hittite texts, but never confirmed. They say its waters have special properties." Mina approached the pit's edge, mesmerized. Her tears fell steadily now, dripping straight into the abyss. And with every drop, she could swear the wails grew louder. That's when she saw it. It wasn't her reflection in the water below. It was her husband's face staring up, his mouth open in a silent scream, his empty eyes pouring an endless stream of tears that merged with the dark waters. "I'm sorry, but I need everyone to leave immediately," a man announced from the chamber's entrance. It was Harun, one of the local guides, his face etched with pure terror. "You shouldn't have found this place. The Gözyashineri, the River of Tears, isn't for archaeologists. It's for the dead who can't stop crying." That night, Mina couldn't sleep. Her tears kept streaming, and now she felt a faint pressure behind her eyes, as if something were trying to push its way out. When she finally managed to look in the small mirror she carried, she saw with horror that her eyes were completely white, with tiny protrusions moving beneath the skin around them. And she knew, with a terrible certainty, that she had to return to the river. Her tears had already opened a path to it, and now it was calling her to join the other grieving souls who had wept too much. 3 days had passed since the discovery of the pit, and Mina's condition worsened by the hour. Her skin was dry and taut over her bones, except around her eyes, where it had become swollen and translucent. The liquid streaming from her eyes no longer resembled normal tears. It was thicker, almost gelatinous, leaving whitish trails on her skin that burned like acid. Professor Öztürk had ordered a temporary shutdown of the archaeological site after Harun, the local guide, revealed the full legend of the River of Tears. According to local tradition, millennia ago, during a devastating drought, a procession of women climbed into the caves to beg the gods for rain. They wept for days, their tears pooling in the depths until they formed an underground river. When the rains finally came, the women tried to leave but found they couldn't stop crying. Their bodies began to dissolve into their own tears, merging with the river they'd created. They say those who've shed too many tears in life are called by the river, Harun explained, avoiding Mina's gaze. It tastes their sorrow and wants more, always more. Mina had been isolated in an improvised medical tent. Local doctors were baffled by her condition. Tests showed severe dehydration despite the constant flow of liquid from her eyes. Even more disturbing, imaging scans revealed that her tear ducts had inexplicably expanded, turning into tunnels that seemed to stretch far beyond what was anatomically possible, as if burrowing through her skull. In the early hours of the fourth day, while the camp slept, Mina felt something move inside her eyes. It wasn't just the sensation of more tears forming, it was something solid, something alive. In a panic, she stumbled to the small mirror on the table beside her cot. What she saw choked a scream in her throat. Tiny white shapes, like blind, fry, swam across the surface of her eyes, occasionally darting out before diving back into the pools of tears forming in her sockets. With growing horror, Mina realized she could no longer fully close her eyes. Her eyelids had retracted permanently, exposing her swollen, whitish eyeballs. In her desperation, she ripped the IV from her arm and staggered out of the medical tent. An irresistible compulsion pulled her back to the caves, back to the pit. Her bare feet left wet footprints on the dry ground, not from mud, but from her own tears, which now flowed so profusely they soaked her clothes and dripped from her fingers. The camp was silent, the cave entrance unguarded. Mina moved through the tunnels as if she knew the way by heart, her eyes now emitting a faint bluish glow that lit her path. The walls around her seemed to pulse like living tissue, and the ancient carvings of contorted faces appeared to shift when not directly watched, their mouths opening and closing in silent wails. When she reached the pit's chamber, Mina was no longer alone. Around the dark circumference stood 7 figures, completely still. They were women of different ages, dressed in clothing from various eras, some centuries old. All shared the same appearance, skin stretched tight over bones, and where their eyes should have been, only dark holes from which streamed continuous trickles of tears that moved like living things. "Welcome, sister," they said in unison, their voices a wet whisper, as if coming from throats filled with liquid. "You've missed us." That's when Mina understood. These were the 7 women from the legend. They hadn't fully died. They'd become something between human and part of the river, trapped in an eternal state of transformation. "Your husband is waiting," said the eldest, pointing to the center of the pit. "He weeps for you. His tears have fed our river for months, calling for yours." Mina stepped to the edge and looked down. The water's surface was no longer far below. It had risen nearly to the pit's rim, and it wasn't dark anymore, but clear as glass. Through it, Mina could see faces, hundreds, maybe thousands of submerged faces, all with open eyes, all weeping endlessly, their bodies fused into a single mass that seemed to be the river's very substance. Among them was her husband, his face exactly as it had been on the day of the accident, except for his eyes, now white pools pouring tears that mingled with the surrounding waters. He reached a hand toward her, his lips forming her name without sound. "Why do you weep so much?" "Minaka-san?" asked the youngest of the 7. "Grief is natural, but your tears are excessive. What truly makes you suffer?" The question hit Mina like a physical blow. Beneath her pain for her husband's loss was something else, a guilt she'd never admitted to herself. On the night of the accident, they'd fought. She'd screamed that she hated him, that she wished he'd disappear. Minutes later, he stormed out, driving in a rage, and never came back. Mina's tears now fell directly into the pit, and with each drop, she felt a growing connection to the waters below. Something was rising through the stream of her tears, as if using them as a pathway into her. Tiny white shapes, like those swimming in her eyes, now climbed against the current of her tears, entering her face. Mina felt a sudden tug, as if every tear she'd ever shed was being pulled out of her at once. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed at the pit's edge, half her body dangling over the abyss. That's when she saw her reflection in the water's surface. Her face was no longer human. Her eyes had become 2 massive holes consuming half her face, and from them poured not just tears, but thousands of the tiny white creatures. Her mouth was stretched in a silent scream that seemed endless, her lips retracted to expose her gums, and the skull beneath. As she watched, horrified, her reflection began to change. The face in the water morphed into her husband's, then one of the 7 women, then another unknown face, and another, as if the river was showing all those who'd joined it over centuries. "We are not the river," whispered the eldest of the 7, now directly behind Mina. "We are the tears, and tears always find their way back home." Professor Öztürk was the first to notice Mina's disappearance. When the medical team found her tent empty the next morning, a frantic search began. Following the trail of dampness she'd left behind, they reached the cave entrance. "Can't go in there," Harun insisted, blocking the way. "If she went to the river willingly, she's beyond our help." But Öztürk was a man of science. He didn't believe in legends or curses. Gathering a small rescue team, he entered the tunnels determined to find his colleague. What they found in the pit's chamber defied any rational explanation. The water level had risen dramatically, flooding half the chamber. On the surface floated thousands of small, white, embryo-like forms, each with tiny black eyes that turned simultaneously to stare at the newcomers. There was no sign of Mina, only her clothes, neatly folded at the pit's edge, completely dry, as if untouched by a single tear. As the rescue team backed away in horror, Öztürk approached the water, mesmerized by the sight of the tiny creatures. One swam to the edge, and rose partially out, its eyes fixed on him. For a fleeting moment, he swore the creature's minuscule face bore Miner's features. Then the drops began falling from the cave ceiling, thick, viscous, with a faint bluish hue. One hit Öztürk's face, and when he instinctively touched it, he felt something move against his finger. In the days that followed, the expedition was officially shut down. Tourism authorities sealed the cave entrance and declared the area hazardous due to toxic gases that could cause hallucinations and respiratory issues. The real reason was never publicly disclosed. 6 months later, on a rainy autumn afternoon in Istanbul, a woman stopped to gaze at the Bosphorus from one of the city's bridges. She wore dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky and held an umbrella, though she didn't seem to care about getting wet. The rain ran down her face in strange rivulets, as if avoiding something invisible beneath her skin. Anyone close enough would have noticed something odd. The rain that touched her face didn't fall normally. Instead, it seemed to be sucked inward through her eyes hidden behind the sunglasses. The woman opened her bag and pulled out a small vial. Inside swam a single white creature, the size of a fingernail, with tiny black eyes and a mouth that seemed perpetually open in a silent wail. "I found another one today," she whispered, as if speaking to the vial, "in a children's hospital. A mother who lost her son and can't stop crying. Soon her tears will change, like mine." She lifted her sunglasses briefly, revealing not eyes, but two perfectly circular holes filled with clear liquid, where dozens of tiny white forms swam. The creatures stirred at the light, diving deeper into her sockets. "The river is growing," she continued, replacing the sunglasses. "Soon it won't need the caves anymore. It'll find new paths, through drains, faucets, coffee cups left, out in the rain. And everyone who's wept too much will hear its call." The woman emptied the vial into the Bosphorus and watched as the tiny creature swam swiftly against the current, vanishing into the depths. Then she pulled out a pen and a small notebook. Inside was a list of names, people in deep mourning, people who'd lost loved ones and couldn't move past the pain. Next to each name was a date. The last name on the list was Ayşe Yılmaz, a recent widow living near the Grand Bazaar. Beside her name, tomorrow's date. "Her tears are already changing," the woman murmured, tucking the notebook away. "I can smell it from here. Soon she'll see her husband's face in the water and won't resist following him." As she walked away from the bridge, the rain intensified. People ran for cover, annoyed by the weather. But those who looked closely at the sky would have noticed something strange in the falling rain. Tiny reflections like miniature faces formed in the larger drops, all weeping, all silently calling. And across Istanbul, in sinks and bathtubs, in puddles and fountains, people stopped to stare at the water, feeling an odd connection to it. Some swore they saw the faces of lost loved ones reflected on the surface. Others noticed their tears seemed thicker lately, somehow more alive. The river of tears was finding new paths, spreading beyond the ancient caves, seeping into the world of the living through the one element that connects all humans, the ability to cry for those they love. And somewhere in the depths of the Bosphorus, something immense and white, with thousands of eyes and mouths, grew slowly, fed by every tear of sorrow shed in the city. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more disturbing content like this. Share it with your friends. Who knows, maybe their tears will start to change too. After all, the river of tears is always looking for new connections. Until the next nightmare.